In 2005, 6 decades after the Nazi concentration camps were liberated, including the 1,200 survivors found alive at Auschwitz out of the 1.3 million deported there, the United Nations resolved to create a special day of memory of the Nazi genocide. The date selected was January 27th, the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz by the Russian army. UN Resolution 60/7 intended not only to set aside a day to honor the dead, but to remind the world never to forget the horror, lest it be repeated. So tonight, in anticipation of Monday's anniversary, and in the long shadow of October 7th, the worst single day of slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust, we pause not only to remember those who perished in the Shoah, but to keep alive the memories of their suffering and these two familiar societal forces that allowed for it: the passive acceptance of authoritarianism, the demonization of minorities, the promulgation of nativist rhetoric, and policies that denied thousands of asylum seekers refuge, instead sending them back to their deaths. Sadly, our efforts have been insufficient. Statistics indicate that 1 in 5 Americans between the ages of 18 and 29 believes the Holocaust is a myth, and half of those who believe it did occur think the death toll was under 2 million. An appallingly low number understand the history of Jews in Israel, which, had it existed as a state 80 years ago, could have saved a third of our people. And of course, Israel, and by extension us, descendants of those murdered, we have been accused of genocide ourselves. Dr. Anita Shapira, one of Israel's most distinguished historians, has made it her life's work to fight such misinformation and disinformation, and to study and write about the history of Zionism and Israel. But Dr. Shapira is not only a scholar, she is also one of the dwindling number of Holocaust survivors who can bear direct witness to the horror and the price we pay for the world's ignorance. She was just a toddler when, in the dead of night, her mother carried her over the red brick wall topped with glass shards and barbed wire that surrounded the Warsaw Ghetto, and handed her to a stranger. The next morning, Anita woke up in a convent where she was sheltered in safety until the end of the war. Her parents did not survive, but she was adopted by a Jewish couple who took her with them to Palestine in 1947. She still recalls her adopted mother waking her that day in May 1948, when the establishment of the State of Israel was declared. Since then, she's written, I've lived for Israeli history. In the course of doing so, she founded the Yitzhak Rabin Center, served as professor of Jewish history at Tel Aviv University, and headed the Weizmann Institute for the Study of Zionism. She is the author of 7 books, editor of 4 more, and winner of both the National Jewish Book Award and the Israel Prize. We are profoundly honored to welcome her tonight. So grateful for her commitment to the transmission of our history, door to door, from generation to generation, lest we and so many others forget it. Please welcome to our bima Dr. Anita Shapira. Is there any special music to play while we're waiting for glasses?
This is called Misty. Because I think the first lyric goes a little something like this. Look at me, I'm as helpless. Something like that, right? It's your generation, not mine, you would know.
Okay. Good evening.
It's okay, take it.
A few days after the disaster of October 7, there was in Israel a discourse comparing the recent event to the Holocaust. I was opposed to thinking about the two events in the same category. The Holocaust was a world-moving event encompassing a whole continent, planned to the last detail with the purpose of genocide. The October 7th was tragic, a terrible massacre, but from the point of view of the Jewish people, it had very little in common with the Holocaust. It happened in a sovereign Jewish state which owns an army capable of protecting its people. And eventually, this difference, which was for a moment forgotten in the dramatic events of the first days after the Holocaust, after the massacre, was acknowledged a few weeks later. However, we can compare the two events from a different perspective, not from the national and universal one, but from the personal one, the emotional experience of people who went through these events. What I intend to do today is to compare my own experience as a child to the experience of children who went through the October 7th disaster. I was born in the wrong time, in the wrong place. March 25th, 1940, Warsaw, Poland. Psychologists claim that a child less than 3 years old does not remember. But I have memories. For instance, I knew my birthday. I knew our address in Warsaw. But I did not remember my family name. I have a vivid memory of the night my mother smuggled me out of the ghetto and brought me to the convent where I spent, according to my estimate, about 2 years. I remember the red brick wall, the barbed wire, and the pieces of glass stuck on the wall. It was a dark night, and somebody with a lantern was walking to and through on the street on the other side of the wall. And I said something to my mommy, and she said, "Shh," and I fell asleep. When I woke up, it was already day, and I was in a class of small girls, and my mother, whose face I did not remember, made me walk towards the woman there a teacher, a nun, I don't know. I don't have many memories from the convent. I attended the religious ceremonies, but I hated swallowing the flakes that were considered Jesus' flesh. I knew all the time that I am Jewish. And I knew that being a Jew is a bad thing, which I'm not supposed to tell anyone. Once I asked a nun why there are wars in the world, and she replied that we should blame Adam and Eve, who ate the apple from the tree of knowledge. At that time, the answer did not make sense to me. But eventually, I think maybe she was right. I asked the question because my mom had told me that my father, who had been immobilized in the Polish army and vanished in Russia like millions of people, would be coming back to fetch me from the convent at the end of the war. I have a birthmark on my shoulder, and my mother told me that she wrote to him about it, and that in order to identify me when he comes back. Eventually, at the end of the war, Jewish soldiers in the Polish army came and took me from the convent to a Jewish orphanage. They took me in a lorry. Were there other Jewish children on the trip? Maybe, I don't remember. I fell asleep and woke up in the orphanage. The teacher said something to me that meant that I am Jewish, and I was frightened and insisted that I am not Jewish. But he smiled and told me, we are all Jews, you are safe. Sometimes later, a woman came to the orphanage and took me with her. Was she a friend of my mother who promised her to take care of me until my father returned from Russia? Probably. Was she Jewish? I don't know. She took me with her to Lodz. On the way to Lodz, we passed through the ruins of Warsaw, and the image of the complete destruction of the city stuck in my memory. The woman was not a nice person, and he showed no warmth to the little girl. Soon enough, she got tired of taking care of me, as my father did not return from Russia. She gave me away like a package of goods to another friend of my mother. This is my assumption, as the woman with whom I stayed now was an officer in the Polish army, a beautiful young woman who did show the little girl the warmth that I missed. She arranged for me a blanket near the stove to sleep on. She used to hold me on her knees, and the rough wool of her gallifet trousers was not pleasant to my thighs. There came a moment when this young woman decided that my father apparently won't return, and she let the Jewish committee know that she would like to give the girl for adoption. One day, a delegation from a family who was interested in adopting a child came to inspect the candidate. Later, I was told that they heard about a little girl that was getting lost, and as they were looking for a girl and a young one, I fitted their expectations. They took me to their house. They had spent the war in Russia and had returned to their town in eastern Poland, hoping to find family members, survivors. They found a land empty of Jews. At that time, any survivor from the same shtetl or a far relative were treated like family members. So few survived. They left eastern Poland and moved to Lodz, where a Jewish center was established. After the inspection in the house of the beautiful officer, they took me to visit their home. There were many people there, and a baby born after the war. They fed me, made me a bath, and put me to sleep in a normal bed with fresh linen. And I said, "It's so good here. May I stay?" At that moment, everybody started to cry. They remembered the families that perished, the children that did not survive, the children that were not born. This became my family, warm and loving, my anchor in the world. They raised me in Israel, and whatever I achieved in my life, family, career, I am to thank these warm-hearted and generous people. Now I wish to tell you the story of a family in the Gaza envelope on October 7. A father, mother, and 3 children. On the morning of that day, at 6:30 in the morning, they woke up to the sound of missiles falling. The mother and the children went immediately to the sheltered room, and the father, who was a news photographer, went out to take photos. In the film of his camera were found photos of parachutists that were at that moment invading the kibbutz. The mother was shot immediately, apparently through the window, and lay dead on the floor of the room. The eldest boy, 9 years old, called his father, who returned home immediately, took the youngest girl, 4 years old, in his arms, and the other kids followed him. Apparently, he intended to take them to the car and go somewhere safe. But a terrorist stood in his way and shot him. He fell, and the little girl fell with him. The terrorist made a movement toward the kids to get lost, and they ran back to the sheltered room. All this happened around 7 in the morning. There was a closet in the sheltered room which contained clothes. The kids hid in the closet. After some time, the boy called the police, 911, so that somebody would get them to a safe place. A policewoman who answered the call thought he was making fun. Both parents killed in a kibbutz. But eventually, somebody understood that the kids needed help and referred them to a social worker who specialized in kids and lived in the other side of the country, in Lower Galilee, in a moshava called Rosh Pina. She got the call from emergency services and started to communicate with the children. The time was approximately 9 o'clock. People all over the country still did not realize what was going on in the Gaza envelope. It was a holiday and people slept late. She, the social worker, whom I will call Yael, because I interviewed her and I promised not to disclose her name. Excuse me, it was a holiday and people slept late. The defenders of the kibbutz were heavily outnumbered by the attackers, and the kibbutz was overrun by Hamas. The trails of the kibbutz became a death zone. No help was available for the children. Yael, the social worker, understood that the parents were killed and assumed that the little girl was also killed. Yael, first of all, tried to get acquainted with the kids, to learn names, age. They were 9 and 6. She opened the television in her home in the safety of the Lower Galilee, and suddenly she realized that the kids were in mortal danger and that she was the guide to keep them alive. She was the responsible adult who was to lead them to safety. There was a problem of time. How long was she going to talk with them? She assumed it would be half an hour, an hour. Who would come to save them? What about the Hamasniks in the streets, outside? And there were practical, immediate problems. There was the problem of water. In the closet, there was no water. She instructed the boy a number of times when the area was quiet to get out of the closet and get them water. Suddenly, someone knocked at the door. She told them not to open the closet and to keep quiet. Probably the Hamasniks saw the body of the mother and decided that the house was empty. Then there was the problem of the charger. The battery of the telephone was running low. She asked the boy if he knew where they kept the charger. He said that it was in the kitchen. Can he run fast and bring it to the shelter room? But in order to do that, the child had to pass near the body of his mother. Would he be capable of doing it? The little girl, was afraid for him to go out of the sheltered room. Eventually, the boy was brave and did it. In the meantime, he reported that he smelled smoke. Yael called the grandfather, who was enclosed in another house in the kibbutz and could not rescue his grandchildren. And he informed her that the whole kibbutz was in smoke. So she made a plan with the boy what to do if the terrorists put the house on fire. Luckily, they did not have to implement this plan. The hours passed by. Around 4 in the afternoon, the boy reported that he heard cars and maybe it's soldiers coming to save them. Yael did not know what to do. She told him to keep quiet and to wait until somebody comes who calls their names. And then the boy said, they are shouting in Hebrew, but these are screams of people who are being killed. In the long hours, when they waited for their saviors, they discussed their future. What will happen to them? And Yael told them, you are wonderful kids. People will fight for the right to adopt you. The 6-year-old girl mourned her little sister, who they thought was killed. She was so small, she did not have a chance to accomplish anything. In the meantime, darkness came. The girl said, we have not yet had supper. And Yael thought, honey, you did not have breakfast or lunch as well. At 9 o'clock, there came the saviors from the army after 12 hours of telephone discussion. Just like in my case, the end of the story was a happy ending. The third sister, though she was kept hostage for 51 days in Gaza, was returned alive and well. The children were adopted by the family of their mother's sister. I cannot say if they were not traumatized. I assume they were. But the long telephone call was their saving connection to civilization, to people who cared for them. And during that terrible day gave them a feeling that they can continue to be children, that an adult was taking care of them. The October 7th was neither Holocaust nor a pogrom, but it was a massacre during which people experienced the fear, terror, and helplessness that characterize survivors of the Holocaust. Those children in the closet experienced what Anne Frank experienced and what I experienced. In the Holocaust perished about 2 million Jewish children. Sometimes I think about those kids. Did they know that they were going to die? Did somebody mourn them? Did their siblings who survived thought sometimes about them, like I thought about the siblings that I did not have? When my daughter reached the age of 2 years, I was following her with my eyes and thinking, this is how I looked when my mother left me in the convent. Would I have been able of leaving this little child? And when my daughter's daughter, my granddaughter, reached that age, my daughter was also following her with that same thought. Would I have been able to leave her? The trauma, even if hidden, is there and goes through generations. Last week, in a gathering, people my age told how October 7th aroused their Holocaust trauma, the feelings of fear and helplessness. One last word. Let's think for a moment about those 2 million kids who perished. How many musicians, artists, scholars, and simple good people were lost to the world. We always say that we vanquished Hitler, but is it true? The Jewish people would have been different had they survived. Thank you.